Good morning and good evening to all of our people out in IST. Welcome to our Q&A event with Marty Cagan. Thank you, Marty, for being here. We're so excited to have everyone this morning. I'm just going to give a brief overview of our agenda for the day, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So let's see. We're going to start with an introduction to APMC and also book club. I know that a lot of you have been in our discussions about Inspired over the past month or so, but I did just want to talk a little bit about book club if you're new to APMC or to this event. So we meet once every 2 weeks or so, and we read books that are career-oriented, related to product management, to kind of help us connect with each other in the community, just engage with each other, build those relationships, feel connected in a time of COVID when it's a little difficult to do that, and then grow personally and in our careers. So I'd love for people to join book club after this event. We have a Slack channel and a registration form that I'll give you to fill out at the end of the event. So I'd love, Marty, if you would be willing to give a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll talk a little bit about Inspired and go through some questions that we've prepared. And after that, we'll open the floor for questions from the community and close out with a challenge. So Marty, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for connecting on a Saturday. I hopefully this will be worth some time of your weekend. For those that don't know me, let's see. I've been working on tech products my entire career since literally right out of college. The first 10 years of my career was as a developer, software engineer. So I came into product from that side. That's probably true for some of you too. I got very interested though in not just how do you build software, but how do you decide what to build? And that sort of took me on the path towards product. I was really very lucky. This was in the era, this was just before the internet actually. So the timing was great for me because this was when desktop computing was happening. And I worked for HP Labs, which was considered, this was before Google, well before Google, but it was considered, today you would call it the Google of the day. They were the most consistently innovative company in the industry at the time, and they took development of their people incredibly seriously. I went through it's called the HP Way, the Engineering Leadership Training Program. One of the things I realized that I think is very relevant to an APM program is every single day of those 10 years, I had at least one manager that was responsible for helping me to get better at my job. So I learned, of course, that's not the case for most people in our industry, but I thought that was normal. And it hugely benefited me. And then I got lucky because the internet got started, and some of the earliest engineers came from the group I was in. And I was introduced to Mark Andreessen, and I was responsible. I had done products at HP for years, but I had done them, all the products were for developers. And so I built a little bit of a reputation as far as products for developers, and that's what the internet was really viewed as, a platform for developers early on. And so it was a dream job. I was the head of platform and tools, and learned so much, worked with amazing people like Ben Horowitz, and actually a long list of super smart people, still friends today. And the other cool thing was that we were learning that the old ways of building software weren't really working in the internet era. And so we were kind of figuring it out as we were going along. And we started learning and sharing what we had, the lessons with new hires. And not just APMs, but we sort of had similar programs in place for designers and engineers. And because we were really constrained by how fast we could bring strong people up to speed. It didn't, at the time, Netscape, we could hire anybody we wanted, really. Everybody wanted to work there, but nobody knew tech products. So we had to really train ourselves. And anyway, after about 6 years of having incredible amount of fun, luckiest, best job I've ever had, we were acquired. We lost the browser wars to Microsoft, actually is what happened, and we were acquired by AOL. But I had got to meet the founder, one of the founders of eBay, Pierre Omidyar, who was a great guy, and I joined to be their original head of product and design. And did the same thing, hired a lot of people, trained a lot of people, because it's still largely true. To scale, you really have to develop your own people. But anyway, after eBay, I just wanted to work with startups and growth stage companies and do some writing. And that's what I did. And I've been going ever since. Just started Silicon Valley Product Group, which is for my friends. It's basically 6 of us. One is a marketing partner and the other 5 focus on product. We've all worked together before and been there, done that. So we just wanted to share with other people. So that's really what we do. It's the greatest job for sure. It's hard to even call it a job. It's more just fun. So anyway, that's sort of my background. And I am, maybe one clarification I should make up front. I already received an email about this. Because I am on record for 2 things that might sound contradictory to you. First, I am on record as a huge fan of APM programs. I recommend, in fact, some of you are probably in APM programs that I recommended companies that I worked with when they were young to start. The original one, of course, was Marissa Mayer at Google and I think that's her best legacy there, but lots of companies, of course, have adopted that. I love the idea of picking people that have very high potential and giving them intense coaching to really get them to exceptional skills. And that is just a great thing to do. I am also on record as very vocally against APMs. APMs stand, unfortunately, APM, as you probably know, officially stands for Associate Product Managers. I try to disambiguate that by saying APM programs is really an apprenticeship program. They're much more an apprentice product manager. Unfortunately, in most of the industry, they don't know anything about Google's origins for this. They don't know anything about apprentice product managers. All they do is hire junior product managers and call them associate product managers. I don't know if they're trying to save some money. I think that's really what's going on, or they don't know what they're doing. But that is, to me, one of the most short-sighted, bad decisions companies can make, is having an associate product manager level. Remember, on a product team, you've got a bunch of engineers probably, but you got one designer, one product manager. And as you know, tech is all garbage in, garbage out. And so to me, you either have a competent product manager or you have an incompetent product manager. And I think there's no room, and it's an incredible waste of money. Who wants to be on a product team as an engineer with a product manager that is not yet competent? So I want to draw a distinction. When I say APM, I mean apprenticeship product manager. And if any of you are in, if any of you have the title associate product manager because you are a junior product manager, then I would encourage you to, as quickly as possible, get out of that state and into the state of a competent product manager. There is a whole other dimension we need to talk about too, because I'm talking here about product teams, and most companies don't even have product teams. They have feature teams or worse. And if it's a feature team or a delivery team, then the truth is they don't need a product manager. They need, in a delivery team, they need a Jira administrator. So great, that's what you want to be. That's a product owner, literally just a product owner role. And if you're using a process like SAFe or something at your company, as unfortunately that's you. And that is so far away from an APM program. I'm hoping nobody here is in that kind of company. But if you are in a company using that process, I hate to say this, but the most important advice I can give you is find a different company. you won't be able to do product in a company like that. And ideally, that company will, at some point, they will get a technology leader that knows what they're doing, and then they'll move to more modern ways of working. But until that happens, there's really no room for what we call a product manager. Most companies, though, or a lot of companies, have feature teams, which I don't really spend any of my time with companies that are delivery teams. There's just no overlap of interest there. I'm all about consistent innovation, and they're not. But I do spend a lot of my time with companies that have feature teams that are trying to go to real product teams. And, interestingly, the big difference there is not design and engineering are not that different. A little bit, we can talk about that, but the product role is very different. In fact, when I looked at the questions that Madeline provided, I could see some of those questions were coming from people that were stuck in a feature team. You could see that behind the question, because in a feature team, they almost always have somebody called product manager, just because that's the thing you do today, but they're really project managers. That's what they're really doing. They're herding the cats. And don't get me wrong, this is important stuff, but they're herding the cats and trying to go from, they've got some feature on a roadmap, and they've got to get that designed, and they go to the designers and get some wireframes, and they put all that into Jira, and they give it to the engineers. They do a little sprint planning, and they're basically herding the cats and getting things through. But that is such a different job than a product team. In a product team, you actually have a real product manager, and you need a real product manager because the responsibilities are completely different. Because in a product team, we're not given a bunch of features to build on a roadmap. We're given some hard problems to solve. And we have to solve them in ways that our customers love but work for our business. And our engineers still work on coming up with a feasible solution that works. Our designers still work on coming up with a solution that is usable. But now in a product team, a product manager has to make sure that solution is valuable, meaning people will buy it or choose to use it, and viable, meaning it will work for all the different dimensions of our business. That means we can afford to build it. It means we can monetize it. It means that we can market it effectively. It means we can sell it effectively. It means that it's compliant with things like security, privacy considerations. And that's the product manager role, viability and value. And those two are super hard. That's what makes the job hard. Hopefully you can see that's why there's no room for junior product manager for that. That is a hard role. That is what Ben Horowitz meant when he said a good product manager is the CEO of their product. Because if you think about it, that's exactly what a CEO of a startup does. They worry about value and viability, and then they lean on the engineers and the designers for feasibility and usability. But you might notice there's none of that going on in a feature team. Because in a feature team, you're already given a roadmap. And that means that whoever requested those features on the roadmap, they are implicitly taking responsibility for value. In other words, somebody thinks that's going to help. And viability, in other words, yeah, I think it's legal for us to do this and it's worth doing. Now, but in a product team, that's not how it works. We're given problems to solve, so we need to take that responsibility. So the job of a product manager on a product team is really dramatically different than the job of a quote product manager on a feature team. So I get that out of the way because everything I say in this, every question I answer, I will be talking about the context of a product team, a real product team. If you're stuck in a feature team, then I wouldn't give up on the company. I think most companies that have feature teams aspire to become a real product team. They know that Amazon works very differently than they do, and they know that it's more effective, and they want some of that. And so in my experience, most of those companies, they just need help transforming. That's really what, when people say we need to do a digital transformation, most of them don't even know what they mean by that, but this is what it really means. It means to be able to work like Amazon or work like Google or work like Apple or Netflix or Airbnb or Slack or Etsy, or, you know, we could keep going. There's a lot of really good companies today around the world. And then there's a lot of, you know, not very good companies. So
That's
anyway,
awesome.
that was a long answer to that question.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we see in big companies, small startups, everything, that there's a lot of imitation, like trying to do the right way, but we don't really know. And I think a lot of us here in this community are like on a stepping stone to get to product manager. So that's really great advice. And I think that everybody will take it to heart. Well, let's start with the first question, and then we'll see what you have to say. So the first one here is that product managers tend to require both breadth and depth of knowledge for many functions. In the book, you mentioned that we need to know data, customer, business, marketing, all of it. So the need to be a jack of all trades from the very beginning can be kind of overwhelming. And like you said, that's more of a good product manager, but most of us are junior PMs. So which learning approaches would you recommend for junior PMs looking to kind of learn everything at once?
Well, first, I do want to clarify, because I'm guessing this is one of those questions that really comes from the feature team. Whenever you hear that, oh, it's jack of all trades kind of thing, to me, that's the same as nothing. It's like you're not really responsible for any one thing. You just kind of have to know, which sounds a lot more like somebody who's really a project manager to me. And so I would argue that no. In fact, on a real product team, the product manager does not need to be a designer. In fact, most of them are not the good ones, and they don't need to be engineers. Those are the three core skill sets: product, design, engineering on a team. And we can talk about the product management skills that are necessary. I don't think that's jack of all trades at all. In fact, most designers would say it absolutely is not. Most engineers would say it's absolutely not. But if you're a project manager operating at 100,000 feet and herding cats, then that's what it feels like. So I think it's about going deep. And we can talk about that. But I want to be clear. What I'm really talking about here is definitely an empowered product team, a true product manager. So in order to be able to ensure value and viability, the product manager needs basically four skills or four areas of expertise. One is that you have to really know your customers, really get to know your customers, which is actually not very hard. And I'm, again, you heard me from earlier, I'm going to sort of take issue with this whole, I hate the phrase junior PM. From a lot of people, they just equate it to young, but some of the best product people I've ever met are like right out of college, or sometimes not even went to college. They skipped it. And so it's not about age at all. But I do think in a real product team, a product manager has to do their homework, which is what I'm about to describe. If they've done that preparation, which really with a good manager, you can do in about 3 months. If you've got a good manager that is doing what they're supposed to do, and I realize that's a huge if, right? But if you have that, it takes about 3 months. And during that 3 months is where you build these four areas of expertise. And it starts with get your ass out of the building and go visit customers. I know that when I was, frustrated engineer, I got into product because I thought the product person was not very good. And so as an engineer, you start whining enough and they say, okay, you can try it. And, but the person who was coaching me on products said, look, you're not allowed to make any decisions at all until after you go visit 30 customers. He had that number. I don't know where he got it from. I've never really considered it, But what is critical is it got me out of the building. He wanted me to go visit 15 customers in the US, 15 in Europe, and before I could make any decision. And at first I kind of resisted because I mentioned before, I did products for developers and I was a developer. I'm like, I know what we need. But even though he was basically he had no experience actually with developer products, but he had a great track record building products. And he's like, he knew, and I learned quickly that I had no clue about our customers, really. In fact, as soon as I got to real customers, and HP had customers all over the world, but I realized that we were very different. Our engineers were very different than their engineers. He didn't know exactly what I was going to find, but he knew I would, have those eureka moments. And I did. I learned so much. What I really learned is how much I didn't know, which was everything. He also knew I didn't know finance. He tried to ask me some basic things about the KPIs. And I might have known what the acronym stood for, like lifetime value, like what that really, what it sort of meant, but I couldn't tell you how it was calculated. Or CPA, I couldn't tell you how we calculated the cost to acquire a customer, and so he knew that was a problem. So he made me read a book on finance. He introduced me to a guy in the finance organization who agreed to tutor me. So what he was really doing was filling my gaps. The finance example is coming to another one of the skill sets, but the first one was, get out of the office and go visit customers. And there's really been there's no substitute for that. And of course we can do that virtually at least as well as in person. It's a lot, you don't have to travel like I had to. So the first area is really deep knowledge of your customers. And just to be clear, for those of you, there's probably half of you are consumer companies, half on B2B companies. And on, one of the nice things I like about consumer companies is every user is a buyer. But in a B2B company, it's a lot more convoluted and complex. There's a whole ecosystem. And when we say know your customers, that means like who's actually the users, what kind of users, who's approvers, who's the buyer, and what do they look at for influencers, so you have to understand that whole ecosystem. And then the second big area of expertise is to really know your data. And you have to understand how users are using your product. That's web analytics, that is Salesforce analytics, sales analytics on the sales cycle, and then normally how the data is changing over time, which is normally in the data warehousing tool. So there's these types of data, even though we almost always have a data analyst to lean on or help us answer questions, that's not a substitute for the product manager actually knowing the data. So that's essential. Hopefully that makes sense. The third one is sort of the fun one for a lot of people. You have to be on top of your industry. You have to know what are the relevant trends. You have to understand the competitive landscape. Super obvious, hopefully, that you need to know that. There are very good resources for product managers today to learn this and track this very low cost, low time. My favorite is actually Stratechery from Ben Thompson, the blog. And then the fourth one is also critically important, which is you have to know your business, how your company works. This is really what's meant by the good product manager as CEO of the company, because you have to understand how your product is sold, how it's marketed, how it's supported, how it funds you, all the different parts of a business. Now, you don't have to be an expert in those parts any more than the CEO has to be an expert in those parts, but you have to know the landscape. You really have to know the different parts and the different players, and you have to know, these are basically stakeholders. There's one or more stakeholders for each of these areas. You have to know what they're concerned about. If it's the legal counsel for your company, you have to know what the lawyer is worried about. You don't have to be a lawyer. You have to know what the lawyer is worried about, so that if you're working on something that touches that, you can then sit down with the lawyer, show the lawyer the prototype, say, did I understand correctly? Is this okay for us to do in the EU with the new laws or privacy issues? So those are the four things that a product manager needs. Like I said, I don't think that's outrageous. That it's not an easy job. I've never said that, but it's, you know, in a few months, if I hire somebody and they can be right out of school, but if I think they've got the right sort of, you know, mind for product, in 3 months, I can have that person not as a junior PM or associate PM or assistant PM, but as a real product manager of a real product team. The kind of person that the engineers and the designer will be grateful to have.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that we tend as product people to be that kind of person that wants to dive in and learn really quickly. So that definitely makes sense. Our next question, we want to work towards outcomes instead of outputs. You talked about this in the book, and we also want to practice continuous discovery and delivery. How can we avoid getting attached to features if, for example, we do have a roadmap at our company? And how can we prevent bias and like the constraints that we have when we're in a secondary discovery cycle?
I'm not sure what a secondary discovery cycle is. Does anybody know what that was referring to?
I'll take a stab. I think that what is meant by this is like after that initial discovery stage, when before you create a product, before you start implementing anything, there's like a roadmap or maybe just, you know, a set of features that you're working towards. After that, if you have to kind of continue going through discovery, that's like another, like I think secondary is an additional discovery cycle.
All right. Well, just to be clear, this is what continuous discovery. It's not a primary. It's not a stage. You know, we're doing discovery every day, just like we're doing delivery every day normally. I think the broader question there is, this is another one of those, is it a feature team or is it a product team? If it's a feature team, you know, and this is why I say, and I hate to say this, but there is no role for discovery on a feature team. If you're already given a roadmap with features, now, and again, there are some, you may know there's some exceptions where not all roadmaps are prioritized lists of features and projects rather. But like 99% of them are. So the most common roadmaps are just lists of features and projects that, you know, a bunch of stakeholders got together and had some form of voting or allocation or some way to come up with those roadmaps. And then they're just basically, they're already solutions. Somebody is giving you this solution to build. That in that model, there's really no place for discovery. You can say there's a little bit of usability testing. There sometimes is, but that's, just to be very clear, it's not discovery unless you are able to figure out that solution to the problem. So if you're given the solution already, you're kind of starting after discovery. There is no discovery. It's just given to you as output. This is the output you have to ship. And that's why I say it's really project management at that point. We have to get it designed, we have to get it built and QA'd and released. That's project management. Now, if it's really a product team and you're asked to solve a problem, then you have to figure out a solution to that problem that works, which by that we mean it's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. And that means trying out lots of ideas. The part of that question is how can you be careful you're not like overly attached to some idea, which is very common human behavior. And the way we fight that is that we make sure that any idea we try out, I mean, officially, or for years, this was called the 2-week rule. Never wait more than 2 weeks before you try out an idea. But most teams today don't wait more than 2 days before you try out an idea. And the point is, if you wait too long, 2 weeks is certainly too long, you're going to have grown too attached to that idea. And then you start, it's actually early Facebook used to call this, they had a rule called don't fall in love. And the idea was, if you work on an idea too long, before you get feedback, you'll fall in love, and then love is blind. So you'll ignore, all the data that would normally really make you think twice. And that doesn't happen if you get feedback before you get too attached to the idea. And so this is part of just what it means to become a professional product manager or professional product designer, is that we learn to try out our ideas way fast. This is not well, it can be. In Inspired, I talked about good product teams typically try out on the order of 15 to 30 ideas per week. Okay, so that's, if you're doing 15 to 30 ideas per week, you're not going to get too attached to anything. And you've all heard that good product people fall in love with the problem, not the solution. It's all saying the same thing. So the problems are what we really care about. That's the outcome. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to work on outcomes if you're given output to build. That's the fundamental problem with roadmaps. Roadmaps inherently are not a problem. The problem is they're given as input. They're not a problem if the team is able to solve the problems they've been assigned and then say, oh, by the way, we're shipping these things on these dates. That's as part of delivery, but we as a product team have been able to figure that out. So most companies, though, their roadmaps are killing them. There is dictating feature teams and all the waste that comes along with that. But anyway, I think that gets to this person's question about, you don't get too attached to certain features if you can try out those ideas quickly.
Awesome. Okay. Next up, PM interns and APMs often need to lead and inspire, but may not have as much ownership and autonomy as senior PMs or coworkers in other functions. You've already touched on this a little bit. Maybe we should be PMs in this position, but do you have any advice or best practices for leading without authority, or techniques for creating missionaries?
Okay, there's a lot of good stuff in this one. A lot of different points that all kind of come together. I do want to clarify, it's not about autonomy. Autonomy is a different concept. Autonomy means your product team as a whole has what they need in order to build what they need. So if they've been given a problem to solve, they've got enough control over the parts and the skills that they can do what they need to. So I don't think this is about autonomy, but it is around, you've all heard one of the really from the beginning challenges with the product role is you have the responsibility without the authority. And I think that's what the root of that part of the question was. You have the responsibility without the authority. And this is what I meant too by, it's really not about seniority. It's not about how long you've been on the earth or, how long. I just learned that age is not a very good correlation with what we're talking about. So, but what you can absolutely do, and this, if I was to give a challenge to the people on the call, it would be this. I like to phrase it as do your homework. If you have actually done your necessary preparation for your job, your team, no matter what your age or experience, your team will see it and be grateful. So those 4 things I described about really knowing the customers, knowing the data, knowing the industry, and knowing your business, when you can show that to your team, when they see that you've done that homework, they actually see that you are contributing in a big way to their product team. I can't tell you how many engineers and designers complain to me that they see no purpose to their product manager because they're a feature team basically. They're like, well, we already know. What do you do? You're just there asking me when it's going to be done, when it's going to be done. That's not really very helpful. And so, but if the product manager is bringing to the team this knowledge of those four things, they are truly helpful because the designer and the engineers don't have that information. They need that information. Without it, they'd have to go, which they hate to do, they'd have to go to stakeholders, they'd have to go to the CEO, they'd have to go wherever to try to get answers. And that's not a very empowered team. That's not a very autonomous team. So they're counting on the product manager to have this. And once you've done your homework, you can share. I've written a lot about the topic of coaching product people. It's sort of my big topic the last couple of years. And one of my favorite techniques is the written narrative. It is a way for a product manager, especially to really think through and then share very transparently their reasoning on a tough decision or a recommendation. And a product manager that does that, does it sincerely, puts the effort in, it's amazing how the perception of that product manager changes, both from their team, but also from the executives. It's my favorite way to repair a reputation for a product manager when the executives in the company have lost confidence in that product manager, which, as you may know, happens a lot. So this is a good way to do that. And techniques for creating missionaries rather than mercenaries. The best thing you can do, and of course, we really want missionaries. That's the argument against feature teams, by the way. Feature teams are mercenaries. Most of the teams are frustrated because they don't even think this is a useful feature they've been, they have to do, but they're like paid to work there. They're paid to build those features. So the best way to really make missionaries is to empower the team and move to the empowered team model. And there's so much evidence today of where the innovation comes from. It comes from these teams from empowered teams, which are teams that actually given problems and they own the solution. One of my favorite ways to do that is to bring engineers and designer with you to customers. And especially when the customers are unhappy. There's nothing more powerful than an unhappy customer, especially on your engineers.
Not your raving fans. Awesome. Well, we have one more prepared question, and then we'll move into community Q&A. So hopefully everybody has the Slido link. Those are the questions that we'll be walking through next. So if you want to go ahead and start posting there in preparation, that'd be awesome. So next question here. This is mostly related to this new era that we're in after COVID. So a lot of product culture and relationship building, especially earning that respect and trust from your coworkers, has occurred in the past in this physical space. Without co-location or face-to-face collaboration, how do you think we can adapt past strategies to this remote work virtual world?
Yeah, this is a big question. I've actually been writing a lot more about this too, because my main job is an advisor to a bunch of companies, and this is obviously what almost everybody is struggling with. There's a few places that have actually opened up offices again, but they're in parts of the country that are doing better than most of us, certainly better than California. So the first thing I would say is that when we look at building these, first of all, good question, because it's all about this trust. And there's two sides of this that I like to focus on. The first one, because this is your foundation, is trust with your product team. They trust you, you trust them. And then the second one is especially, that really applies to the product manager more than the other members of your product team, is trust with the key executives in the company. So when we talk about with your product team, there's really two relationships that are absolutely critical. And that's with your designer, your product designer, and with your tech lead or your most senior engineer. If those two relationships are not solid, you're going to have a really hard time collaborating the way you need to. You'll probably revert to old waterfall ways of working, where basically you just pass artifacts and documents back and forth. And at that point, you've almost destroyed any chance of innovation. So the first relationships you really need to focus on is product manager to product designer, product manager to tech lead. And honestly, I've been doing a lot of coaching of that over Zoom calls. This is how most people are forced to build those relationships. Some companies now have done through the whole interview process, hiring process, and the employee has never even been to the company yet, to their offices yet. Everything has been virtual. And so, they've been forced to deal with this head on. And now they're really, first, there's a lot of tips. I've been sharing this. If you go to the svpg.com articles website, you can see remote working. And part of it is use video, even though it's tiresome. Make time every day. So literally, this is an everyday thing, even if it's a 30-minute call with your tech lead, with your designer. And if you want to do that, the three of you together, even better, really. Just make sure you are nurturing that relationship. And then that doing your homework I talked about just moves from you got to do it to absolutely essential, because people, you can get away with less knowledge when you're sitting there side by side, co-located. You can lean on others. It's a lot harder to do in remote work. So you really need to do your homework, and you will find yourself spending more time writing narratives, sharing those with your colleagues. And that can definitely, if your manager is coaching you like he or she should be, you are really getting good at getting your arguments to the point where others understand them and they're convincing, and that the people that read those arguments feel like they've been heard. Their concerns have been addressed. So, those are some of the things you can do. There's whole other things we could talk about for hours on. There's a lot of behaviors that people don't do in person, but they sort of revert to when they're, and it's even worse. The worst of all is email and then Slack. So obviously we depend on those tools, but people say and do things that they wouldn't do face to face, and they don't necessarily have bad intent, but they often, especially developers, have to be coached a lot on this. They don't even realize what jerks they come across as. And, it doesn't take long before, nobody likes anybody else on the team. So it takes a lot of coaching. It's really made the job of the manager a lot harder.
Sure. And I'm sure that we'll be adapting and learning over the next several months more and more. So we'll see where it goes. All right. Well, that was our last prepared question. So I'm going to move over to the Slido. Our top ranked question right now is from Shrivan, and it's, what is one piece of advice that you'd give to 25-year-old Marty Cagan?
What would I say? Well, I was just a hardcore engineer at the time, and I didn't think I would want to do anything else. But, I think the big thing, there's obviously a lot of learnings over a lot of years. But I struggled for a long time to understand, why is it that good product companies work so differently than all these other companies? It's just, to me, it's just nonsensical. Look at the market cap of Amazon, Apple, Google. Look at their caps. They're $1 trillion+ companies now. And it's not a secret how they work. Most of them, there's books published that Bezos publishes every year, very revealing things, trying to say, look, it's not a secret. You need to be doing this. And people don't. So I've always struggled with, why are some companies so fundamentally different in how they think and work than others. I feel like I understand the answer to that question much better now. That's why I've really started, I used to kind of describe it as a spectrum with great teams and terrible teams and people are in the middle. No, I really think it's not a spectrum. You don't evolve. In fact, I see just as many companies going in the wrong direction. I think it's really, there are different models on how product is done. And over the last year or so, I just decided to name that evil. And to me that, feature team is a thing. It is what most teams do in that other way of working. They don't do it usually intentionally, but they do it nevertheless. And it's usually because they have an executive that came from a bad company and brought the practices. And so they just think that's how you're supposed to work. Arrogance, I think, is a lot at the root of it, where some stakeholders and executives think that they're all Steve Jobs and they're going to tell you what to build. But I wish I understood this dynamic back at 25. I think, first of all, I would have exclusively kept my focus on the good product companies. And then I think that would have been a huge advantage to have so many more years of that understanding.
Thank you so much, Marty. Big fan.
Thanks.
Awesome. Our next question is, I'm on a featured team. I want to be on a product team. Are there ways to create those opportunities for myself, or is it easier to leave for a new company?
Good question. Fair question. So most companies I know that are featured teams, a lot of them are not aware there's anything different. They just know that Amazon works differently than them, but they don't really know what's the difference and how. And a lot of them don't even think it's possible for them to run. They think like Amazon only hires these, geniuses or something like that, which is totally not true. But when I find a company like that, I do encourage them to go to their leaders and ask if moving to the product team model is something that the company would like to pursue. And if the answer is yes, and it usually is yes, actually, but they don't know how, all you really need is if they say, well, why don't you let our product team give it a try? Let us be a pilot team. Let us try the practices of a product team, an empowered product team. And if it doesn't work, we can always go back to the way we've been doing it for the last 20 years. And if it does work, though, maybe other teams would like to adopt that too. That's actually my favorite way to see it grow. Now, it does require some amount of air cover from management. So if the manager says, sorry, we don't have any interest in that, or I don't want to fight that battle or anything like that, then that's where you have to look at your career and make some decisions. For most new product people, I tell them the most important thing is not the company you work for, actually, it's who you work for, literally your personal manager at that company. Is it somebody who will help you become great? Because if you can get a few years, that's why real APM programs are so valuable, because they are literally designed for, in the first couple of years, providing the best coaching available at the company to accelerate that learning process. And after 2 years of it doesn't have to be your manager, it can be others. Like a lot of the APM programs will skip level and have like a VP coaching the APM. That's awesome. That's priceless. If you can get that, it matters a lot less whether it's a consumer company or B2B or what city they're in, not nearly as much as do you have somebody who's going to help you become excellent at your job. And that's people early in their career, and I would think by definition this group is early in their career. That's the most important thing. You want to be at a place where you can learn how it's done well. And there's enough good companies out there that and good leaders out there that you should be able to find that. And that's what you want to. After a couple of years of that, you can write your own ticket. You'll know what good looks like. You'll probably be hired by some company to bring it to their company. That's a great thing to do, but nothing more important.
That's the dream. Cool. Okay, next question. How does one transition as a PM from a really tiny startup at a small scale to a large tech company or a unicorn?
Well, first, I mean, that's a good transition. I love, it's one of those things. Startup experience is priceless. It's also exhausting. And, not everybody's willing to sign up for it, but I think it's like the most valuable things I ever did was a couple true startups and got to ride the growth curve with them. That is just priceless. It is true, though, even if you've had a great success, or by the way, what I'm about to say applies even if it goes the other direction. Let's say your first few years is with Google. It's a big company. They've got all this infrastructure, but they generally do a good job coaching their people and getting them to strength. And then you go to a startup and you have none of these sort of things to help you or the sort of infrastructure that you had before. So there's a big change. Anytime you change companies, just because what worked at one company may not be enough to succeed in the other. Every company has their own culture. They've got their own way of making decisions. They've got their own key influential people. You have to learn how that company operates whenever you start. That is part of that 3-month onboarding. And I explain, obviously, I explained it to you before and the sense of a new product manager, but even if you had been a very experienced senior product manager and come to a new company, your manager's responsibility for those first 3 months is to show you how to succeed at this company. And there are always differences. I mean, even starting with the CEO and their personality, they can really learning how to work and get stuff done in any company can be very different. So without that help, you are very likely going to thrash. And one of the most frustrating things is when you see somebody that has done well, and then they join your company and then they don't do well. And why is that? Well, it's often because they were not really shown how this company operates.
Very cool. Okay. We have time for, I think, 1 or 2 more, and then we'll move on to final closing words. So next up is, what advice do you have for undergrad students applying for PM internships and APM programs, probably associate PM programs, at the companies you've worked for before?
Well, there aren't many PM internships. There's a lot more design and engineering internships because the truth is you can do something in a summer pretty well in those areas. It's really, well, you already heard me say it takes 3 months with a good manager. It takes 3 months to come up to speed as a product manager. If an internship is 3 months, you've basically got nothing done all summer. So that's why it's not that common to have a real PM intern. If all they're doing, of course, is having you basically be an assistant to a product manager, your job is to spend all day in Jira, then of course that's not really what a PM internship would be. You might be able to do that, but that's not really helpful. I would actually argue that it would be more valuable to do an engineering internship, even if you wanted to go into product. I know some people that have done that for sure. Yeah, so let's put the internship comment a little aside, and then let's look at, you're an undergrad and you're looking at getting into a product role. Certainly there's different companies, of course, have different things they're really looking for. And so when I do talk to college students, I'm very interested in what ultimately they're looking for, because I have different opinions of different companies, even great companies, on where they should go and start, depending on their interests. So for example, I do think Google is a very good first job for many people, but it's, they are very strong bias around technology backgrounds. And part of that is religion there, and part of it is justified, and it is evolving. It's evolved a lot over the years, but still they have very strong bias for strong technology, because they know that innovation is about things that are just now possible. So they want everybody, designers, product managers, and obviously engineers, to be very comfortable with enabling technology. So if you know the company you want to go to, then there's things you can do in your last year or two of college to really get yourself aligned to what they're going to be looking for. Certainly, if you, like I said, if I knew back early on the difference in the companies, that would have completely changed the kind of companies that I got very lucky, because I went to sort of the poster child for empowered product team company. And so I was very lucky as all, because I didn't know better. That was a professor sort of steering me. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I think you'd look for. Yeah, and like I said, the most important thing for that first job is the manager that you will have, and making sure they're both willing and able to coach you.
Cool. Okay, one more. There's a huge pool of information and resources out there to learn for shifting into a product management role. How do you simplify the learning plan and make the learning curve steep?
And it's worse than that, I would argue, because most of the advice is contradictory. And so I have so much sympathy for a new product manager today, because you can't even, honestly, who do you trust? This drives me nuts. If you go to one of the major conferences, any of the major conferences, you'll have like a menu of 5 or 6 speakers. 1 or 2 of them, in my opinion, know what they're talking about. 1 or 2 of them shouldn't even have been allowed on the agenda. And 2 or 3 of them are just sort of muddling through it and not really adding anything. And how does somebody supposed to know the difference if you're just new to the area? What I think is really going on, just to be clear, is that most product people come from feature team world. Most of the academic programs, I mean, there's not much academically, but even Harvard, which just kills me, Harvard Business School has a program for product managers, and the curriculum to me is literally from the 1980s. It is crazy how they're doing that. I just, no excuse. So there's a lot of noise out there. And how is somebody to know? Again, if your manager has been there, done that, they were a director, a VP of product at Netflix, and now they've joined this company and hired you, you're going to be good. Just let your manager guide you to the resources. Recently, this frustration I have got out of it sort of boiled over, and I wrote an article called Start Here. Literally, I think it's called Start Here. Just Google SVPG Start Here. It is meant for new product managers that are so frustrated by all the contradictory stuff that I said, well, look, I don't even know if they'll find their way to me, but at least if they do, I want to get them started in the right direction. Because most people I meet are already confused. And worse than that, they already have a ton of bad habits. And trying to take somebody like that and turning them into a good product person starts with trying to get them to forget all these things that they were taught. So I want to try to get them on the right track. And so it's literally New Product Manager Start Here, some title like that. And it's got an intentional sequence of things. So if you can kind of read this, I think you'll you'll get off in the right direction. And of course, there is actually a lot of good voices in product today, but and I listed several of them on that article because I want you to become a student of it. But for everyone that I listed that I think is very helpful to you in your career, there's at least a dozen that I think will absolutely poison your career. I just don't want to call them out by name, but oh my gosh, it's every day people forward me things that are just ridiculous. People have.
We'll have to tread carefully, but that sounds like a good place to get started. So thank you.
Okay.
Cool. Well, we are just about out of time, so I did want to encourage everyone to kind of summarize what you've learned today, and we'd love for you to challenge yourself to take one of the learnings from this event and just practice it sometime this week, and then let us know how that goes. So just post on LinkedIn about your experience, what you learned, and then make sure to hashtag APMC Skill Challenge and tag us. And before we go, just want to say thank you, Marty, and thank you everyone for attending. We would love your feedback as well, so let us know what you liked about this event, maybe what you didn't, and what you'd like to see in the future from APMC and from Book Club. If you'd like to stay in the loop about Book Club, please do join us on our Slack group. We have a channel. It's hashtag Book Club. You can also register for our mailing list, and we'll be starting a new book soon, moving on from Inspired, sad, but we'll be deciding what to read next by, I think, Wednesday of this week. So if you'd like to put your vote in, please do at the link on the slide. Awesome. Any closing words, Marty?
Well, I have a new book just about to come out, so I guess I can mention that. I've been working on it for the last year and a half. It's called Empowered. Inspired is really for product managers and product teams. Empowered is for product leaders. And so anyway, and a lot of it is free. You can get the content on the website anyway, but it'll be in book form out in December. So
that'll have to be our January read. That's awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Good.
Cool. Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. This event has been recorded, so we'll be sharing that later. That'll go out to our mailing list, so just make sure that you have registered at these links if you haven't already. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.